Okay, we'll turn now to Wazir Mohamed. Wazir is an associate professor of sociology at Indiana University East in Richmond, Indiana. He is a Guyanese and former colleague of Walter Rodney in the struggle for a multiracial Guyana. As a member and leader of the WPA, the Working People's Alliance, Dr. Mohamed spent 25 years of his young life and rose to the rank of co-leader of that party before leaving to pursue graduate studies in Binghamton, New York in 2000. Over to you.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you to the organizers for taking this initiative. I want to frame Rodney today, his academic work, his scholarly work within the politics of the struggle against imperialism and colonialism, because and I think that is necessary. So I begin by saying this: in these dreaded times of the rule of the market, the rule of the few, the rule of old and new imperialisms, and the moment of neoliberal politics and the economy, this discourse is relevant, and we have to take this discourse from here into the classroom and into the communities. We have recently celebrated 41 years since Walter Rodney was assassinated in Guyana. Yes, I would say he was assassinated in one place at a particular time and juncture. But his history of struggle for social justice is far wider than the struggles for multiracial democracy in Guyana, as some of the speakers have already mentioned. Assassination, therefore, did not silence his voice. Rodney continues to speak through his scholarship. And why is that? Because Rodney spoke truth to power. Walter Rodney's life was about recapturing the history of the working peoples. That is what he spent his academic life doing. He believed that the working peoples of the world are owed the truth. And I want you to underline that word. And thus his calling was to find and to tell the truth. He therefore made reality of exploitation clearer for those who are exploited in society. This is why he grounded in Jamaica with the Rastafari. But telling the truth in Jamaica to the Rastafari and to the working people of Jamaica led to his banning in 1968. You see, governments fear the truth. Fear of the truth led to the 1974 denial of a job at the University of Guyana. And telling the truth led to his killing in 1980. And since then, fear of the truth has led to him being assassinated time and again in some sections of the press. As we reflect on his connections to working people, a pertinent question, therefore, we have to ponder. Why is it there is this over-concentration on Rodney? Why people fear Rodney? We answer this question through an examination of his practice. The over-concentration are related to attempts to bury the fact that his practice was always about challenging the status quo. That is, the ruling classes. By status quo and ruling classes, I mean the old political structures, what he called the old politics of divide and rule, the old politics of collusion against the interests of the masses of working people and the powers that keep colonialism alive. Today, the neo-colonialists and the neoliberalists. Walter Rodney was firmly against the old politics of divide and rule, ethno-national politics, ethno-national political parties, and ethno-national political mobilization. This is why he never found favor or supported any of the existing political leaders and old parties in Guyana. He was banned from Jamaica and denied a job in Guyana for the simple fact that he was perceived as a threat to those who inculcated and espoused the colonial mentality. What Frantz Fanon famously called black skins and white masks. Essentially, wherever he went, the beneficiaries of the anti-colonial movements and struggles, the new status quo, the new ruling classes, or the new political leaders saw him as a threat. Most of them kept their views privately. Brother Chinedu made mention of what happened in Tanzania. And a few boisterous ones expressed their views openly and through actions. Hence, we saw what happened in Jamaica and in Guyana. Recently, we were treated to some crumbs from the political directorate of Guyana. They announced that his books will now be able to see the light of day in Guyana. Let me ask you to reflect on that for a moment. Think about why Rodney's writing should depend on the behest of politics and political directorates for them to emerge in broad daylight. Think about the politics of the political system. Can freedom wait for political leaders to decide what we should or should not read? I'm reminded of a conversation I had with an author in the United States who once told me of one of the US presidents praising his books for political gain. But in the words of that author, and I quote, "I am certain he never read my books." This is the conundrum of our times. Rather than just say the books will be available, leaders should establish study circles within the leadership to read and study the books. Don't make pronouncements, so that they could make informed judgments on why these books are necessary, why they should be available in schools. I recall a conversation with one of Guyana's many presidents who asked, "Wazir, what would you do if you were president?" My response was, "Study and understand history, and that would help you in organizing your thoughts and ideas on development." Today, in all areas of the world, the beneficiaries of the wealth and resources are the few. This abounds across the Caribbean, in Africa, in Asia, and the Americas. All areas of virulent anti-colonial, independence, and civil rights struggles of the 20th century. Why is this? It is because of misguided leadership. It is because, as Rodney pointed out in How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, lopsided development takes place because of underdevelopment. Let us, for a single moment, stop to ask, is How Europe Underdeveloped Africa one of the books used for study circles of the leadership in Africa today? Or are there study circles? Is How Europe Underdeveloped Africa no longer relevant? Let us take a moment to examine the relevance of How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Rodney gives us two primary concepts in the chapter on development, in which he explained that development implies an increasing capacity to regulate both internal and external relationships. He then explains that underdevelopment is a counterpoint, as something that happens not only because of European imperialism, and underline this point, but more importantly, because of the role of local colluders, because of local collusion, without whom imperialism cannot succeed. So let us examine what Rodney means by underdevelopment. He says, progressive loss, now the first point he makes, is that progressive loss by a society over the control of its own destiny. Underdevelopment is the progressive loss by a society over the control of its own destiny. Underdevelopment is the emergence and strengthening of structures of external dependency in the economy, in health, in education, in culture, and in the state. Underdevelopment is a net transfer of resources. Underdevelopment is the growing gap between the dominant and dominated nations, and between the dominant groups and the dominating within countries. Underdevelopment is the consolidation of a pattern of social stratification, whereby local economic and political elites benefit magnificently from while the masses at the bottom experience marginal progress. And underdevelopment is increasing social tensions and conflict. The country that I'm from, Guyana, We have had increasing social tensions and conflict and all the other points I made here since 1955 and before. I invite you to think about the inferences that could be drawn. Look at our societies today. How Europe on the developed Africa gives us the methodology to understand why wealth, that is development and squalor on the development, expands in our neighborhoods. Rodney is clear that much of the squalor is related to the role of local colluders, the beneficiaries of the struggles of the working peoples for freedom and change. It is not my intention to go into the litany of abuses. Today, everything is blamed on globalization. Let me remind ourselves that all production, all work, and life exists in local communities. Now imagine like Rodney did. If local leaders did not collude or accept the dictates of the imperial powers, what could have been the likely outcome? Imagine if they understood and understands the local terrain, then use that to negotiate and regulate external relationships. Let me ask you another question. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? The proverbial question. If we give up control because of personal avarice and greed to the external forces with whom they partner, is development or underdevelopment going to be the outcome? Most times we are quick and it becomes very easy to blame imperialism. Rodney did blame imperialism, but explained that imperialism succeeds to the extent that they are willing participants at home. Today, Guyana is being recolonized by Exxon. How did this happen? Why did the country accept the terms of the contract that gave away the store? Today, Haitians and Cubans require visas to enter Guyana. Why the first free peoples in the Americas, who charted a path forward for freedom for all working peoples, not have equal rights to travel? Whom do we blame for these travesties? Imperialism or local colluders? Without an educated population who understands the role of the working people in creating better and equal societies, let me ask the question, is development possible? Now, these are central questions that belongs in Rodney's ethos. Many take issue with his radicalism and privately remarks, only if he were less radical, he would have been alive. We should be reminded that assassination is not a single act. It is the sum of a series of acts. I've argued elsewhere that he was assassinated because of his scholarship. His scholarship challenged the political and economic status quo. Now imagine what is wrong about the children's books he wrote, about the history of the Guyanese working people, and so forth. That would have caused the official, unofficial banishment of his scholarly works in Guyana for 41 years. The period of rule of 2 or 3 different governments. Ask ourselves why, although dead, he's still banned in Jamaica, and why at best students are expected to learn about the contents of his scholarly works in a second-hand manner. There was a time when all undergraduates at the University of Dar es Salaam were exposed to his works, but today, a student at the same institution can obtain a bachelor's degree in history without having ever read How Europe Underdeveloped Africa from cover to cover. Today, even governments that came to power and are the beneficiaries of the liberation, independence, and anti-colonial struggles silently accedes to the narrative that the examination of historical underdevelopment and the real histories of the working peoples are not necessary. The beneficiaries of the struggle of the people for genuine independence colludes with the general expunging of anti-capitalist texts from education systems. As a result, the use of the history of the Guyanese working people, grounding with my brothers, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and so forth, has waned considerably in universities, especially in Africa, Guyana, and the Caribbean. Walter Rodney did not implore young scholars to study him. He implored us to understand that the historiography of our peoples, the working peoples, is highly in his words, underdeveloped. By saying that, he was quoting Elsa Govaya. He says that there is a huge gap which we have to cover. What he meant was that the time was reached for us to examine history as written And when we put it under scrutiny, we will find that it was written from the standpoint, the point of view of the oppressor class. Today we see the same thing happening. People are writing history as though those who made the history are not present, as though facts are not facts. How did Rodney explain the huge gap in his historiography? In a 1978 lecture in Binghamton, he said that what we have is there is a whole historical era. The post-slavery era has not been seriously dealt with by any of the historians. In pursuing this path, he referenced the difference between Guyana and the Caribbean, and why history is written misses the point. Most people concentrate, he argues, on the labor shortage theory, which was sold by the representatives of the capitalist, plant, and colonial classes. But Rodney explained that if the labor shortage theory is correct, why were Africans not given work as a matter of rule on the sugar plantations after 1848? And why did sugar in Guyana not decline as it did in the many other Caribbean countries? He helps us begin to comprehend why indentured labor was introduced. He explained that the plantation, the capitalist institution in Guyana in the period of the sugar revolution, required labor, in his words, of a certain type. That labor of a certain type, or contract labor, as we know, accepted the wage rates that were equivalent to the rates the enslaved received in the period of apprenticeship. Rodney helps us to understand that by writing the real history, we would learn as the indentured became free of their contracts, they ended up and established themselves in the free villages the Africans had established. And that most of these villages, East Indians lived in harmony with Africans until after the politics of ethnic division entered in 1955. We would learn that African labor engaged in the popular exercise of freedom, and that for 25 years they created the local government systems and village councils in Guyana. This scholarship, I would argue, is very important to understand the makeup, the division that ensues, the conflict inherited, and if we do that, we can find common solutions. So his call was for new scholarship, probing scholarship to emerge, to find common solutions. In concluding these remarks, I would urge that we situate his political speeches in the context of his scholarship. His urging and striving for multiracial unity and people's power of the working people in Guyana was directly connected and related to his scholarship. The same is true for his striving in Jamaica, captured in groundings with my brothers, and his striving in the liberation struggles in Africa and the struggles for civil rights in the United States. And likewise, his arguments for us to rethink the ideas of Pan-Africanism. He believed that the ideas of Pan-Africanism must consider the role and place of other working peoples of color who were brought to the Caribbean. I hope that we will continue to draw inspiration and build on the scholarship. This will be the best way to celebrate Walter Rodney's legacy. In this time of the rising of the Black Lives Matter movement and the call for reparation and reparative justice, the scholarship and methodologies left us by Rodney can be used as an important tool in clarifying our roles in this vital local and global issue. I close by saying there is a connection between his scholarship and his scholarship of practice and activism. Thank you.